Good evening and welcome to a joint meeting of the Select Board, the Planning Board, and the Affordable Housing Trust. Before we begin, please join us as we recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for that. The purpose of this evening's meeting is to consider a draft housing production plan for discussion and adoption by the Planning Board and the Select Board. Now, let me actually just very briefly pretend that I know a little bit more about a housing production plan than I actually do, and quickly lay out what a housing production plan is. This would be a plan to help Milton understand its local housing needs and demands and present a future vision for future affordable housing. Now, why is a housing production plan important? Number one, it allows a community to address unmet housing needs for low and moderate income residents in the community. It allows a community to try to influence the type, amount, and location of mixed income and affordable housing. And it helps communities meet the state mandate requiring that 10% of the total year-round housing units be affordable by setting a numerical goal for an annual housing production. Now, what is also important in that context is that if a community has a Department of Housing and Community Development approved housing production plan and is granted certification of compliance with the plan by the DHCD, a decision of the Zoning Board of Appeals relative to a permit application may be deemed consistent with local needs if it's consistent with the plan. And so it's very important for the functioning of government with respect to affordable housing. In Milton, we had an affordable housing plan last adopted in late 2014. They last for 5 years with the Department of Housing and Community Development. And so it is very timely for us to consider this plan right now. So let me kick it over to the chair of the Planning Board, Ms. DeGaius.
Thank you, Chair Zulus. I'll be brief. I'm going to open the Planning Board meeting and then turn it back to you.
All right, great, and that's excellent. And I will now kick it over to the member of the Select Board who has been the driving force behind the housing production plan and our affordable housing efforts in Milton, our Vice Chair, Melinda Collins.
I need to share this for a
Take it, you can
moment.
have it. I'm not talking tonight.
Yes, well, that driving force actually is a lot bigger than me. And to that end, this is a thank you. Housing is the foremost concern for people. We cannot sustain health or lead productive, fulfilling lives without shelter. One of the roles of local government is to balance impersonal market forces by responding to personal needs of its citizens as they change or are become better understood over time. So this updated housing production plan both documents unmet needs and maps a path to meeting those needs. I wish to thank the Select Board for acknowledging the need for affordable housing and a wider range of housing options in the town of Milton, which it signaled by forming our housing subcommittee and giving the Affordable Housing Trust its full support in writing this plan. I wish also to thank our housing and planning consultant, Karen Sonnerborg, whose deep industry knowledge and experience has been invaluable, not only to Milton, but also to many of our neighbors and to the Commonwealth as a whole. Likewise, the technical support of our Director of Planning and Community Development was key to the writing and development of this plan. I would also like to thank the members of the Housing Production Plan Working Group, who reviewed the report, discussed and refined strategies, attended and facilitated the forum, and provided expertise from their respective committees, roles, and their professional work as well. So Richard Beeler of the Planning Board and the Housing Committee, Tom Callahan of the Affordable Housing Trust and Housing Committee, Kathleen Conlon of the Master Plan Implementation Committee and the Housing Committee, Julie Kramer, who's the chair of the trustees of the Affordable Housing Trust, Frank Davis, who's with the Affordable Housing Trust, Lauren Massier, our former assistant planner, Philip Murphy of the Affordable Housing Trust, Allison Quinn, our current assistant planner, and Cheryl Tugayas, the chair of the planning board. And Bill Clark was also on the working group. So the Housing Production Plan Working Group, though, has its own thank yous and would like to thank the staff and other individuals for their helpful contributions to the plan, including Bill Bronner from Community Economic Development Assistance Corporation, Robert Bushway and Nancy Shibley from the Assessor's Office, Barbara Cataldo, the Town Clerk's Office, Noreen Dolan of the Milton Residence Fund, Deborah Felton of Fuller Village, Mary Gormley and Glenn Pavlicek of the Milton Public Schools, Margot LeClaire from Massachusetts Department of Community and Housing Development, Sarah McLaren, Milton Residence for the Elderly, Joseph Prondak, our building commissioner, Mary Ann Sullivan from the Council on Aging, who also came and helped on the day of the forum, Brian Tatro of the Milton Housing Authority, and Jennifer McCullough of our Select Board office, who also helped with Community Forum and a lot of other things. Finally, it's also important to acknowledge all those who generously gave their time to participate in the project's Community Housing Forum. We really couldn't have done it without you, our residents. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Melinda. So now, I believe we're going to move into Bill Clark. Bill Clark to introduce Karen Sonderborg. Is that the plan?
That's the plan.
All right, let's follow the plan.
All right. Plan that we have that we're working on tonight, Karen Sonderborg has compiled the plan we have before us. As Melinda just stated, it takes a whole lot of people to put this together, and Karen has done that for us. For someone who doesn't come from Milton, she's pretty well versed on our town. Karen's worked with the town of Milton in 2006 and again in 2014 on previous housing plans. Karen is professionally trained at Harvard's Graduate School of Design, where she received a master's in city planning with a concentration in housing. Karen's subsequent career has focused on the planning and development of affordable housing in the public and nonprofit sectors. During the last dozen or so years, Karen's consulting work has been primarily involved coordinating planning and development efforts to build capacity of small towns and cities in the area of affordable housing production and regulatory reform. This work includes completion of more than 70 affordable housing plans. So for as much as we have her working on it, she's everywhere. With that, bring up Karen and get right into our meats and potatoes of our PowerPoint show.
Great.
So
Oh,
I think
Mr.
we're
Would
Gaddis.
we like to?
I'm just going to suggest that we move
Right.
there
Yeah.
to see.
We
Okay.
should. We're going, so we can see your presentation.
Great idea.
Well, I want to thank everyone on that for the introductions. I feel like some of the information that I was going to present has already been presented very nicely. And I also want to thank the Planning Board and the Select Board for scheduling a joint meeting. I think it's a great opportunity for the both boards to have a dialogue about some of these strategies when we get to the end of the presentation. And I'm going to try to expeditiously move through it so we have ample time for questions and comments. Do you want to? I just have to do this.
No, get rid of that.
Yeah, I already got rid of that.
I hate this computer.
Can we just go on to the next slide? Okay.
You got it.
Well, Okay. So we already have a sense of, before I start, let me just preface the presentation by saying that we had the first community housing forum on the project in September. And for that meeting, we focused on the first major component of the housing production plan that's required by the state, the housing needs assessment. We revisited a lot of data sources and presented the key findings at that meeting. Most importantly, we had a lot of participation from the community and broke up into groups so folks could weigh in on what they thought were the most important strategies for including in this particular update of the housing production plan. Tonight, we're presenting the package that kind of came through that meeting, as well as other sources for discussion. And we're going to still just revisit some very basic slides, kind of the building blocks for affordable housing and for the context of what we're asking you to approve this evening. And we already had a bit of an overview of what a housing production plan is. And the housing production is actually a subset of the Chapter 40B regulations that basically says if the town produces 0.5% of its year-round housing stock, and for Milton, that's currently 48 units, and it already has a plan that's approved that meets all the state requirements, it's in a position to potentially deny what it considered a comprehensive permit project that does not meet local housing needs. For that half of 1% is equivalent of 48 units, as I mentioned. If the town produces double that, 1% of its year-round housing stock, it can get a 2-year period where it can deny unwanted comprehensive permit projects without the developer's ability to appeal, as opposed to the 1 year under the 48 level. When the 2020 census figures are released, the year-round housing figure will increase, but still, based on kind of projected figures, the year-round housing production figure is probably not going to go beyond 50 units. So what is affordable housing? There are different definitions. HUD basically says if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing costs, whether for ownership or rental, you're spending too much. If you're spending more than half your income on housing costs, you're called having severe cost burdens or housing affordability problems. The definition that we hear the most relates to that under Chapter 40B. It basically says a unit has to meet a number of requirements before it can be added to what's called a subsidized housing inventory, that then are units that go towards that 10% affordability threshold under 40B. Once again, if the town surpasses that 10%, it can potentially deny what it considers inappropriate 40B applications without the developer's ability to appeal. For a unit to count towards housing production goals and towards that 10% affordability goal, it has to meet these requirements. It has to be affordable to households earning at or below 80% area median income, and those limits are adjusted annually according to household size. And last year, the income limits went up 10%. Usually they go up a bit, but last year they went up 10%. So that was a huge increase. It went from, say, for a household of 3, from $73,000 to $80,300. We're talking about qualifying households who are working in the community. The units are permanent and they're subsidized by a local, state, federal resource, or they're approved by a subsidizing agency, such as is the case for 40B developments. They need to be deed restricted, and we're moving more and more towards in perpetuity, and they have to be affirmatively marketed. Folks who might not normally hear about something, the opportunity in Milton, should have the ability to learn about the housing that's available and have the ability to apply. So there has to be affirmative marketing outside of the community. So where is Milton with respect to that 10% affordability goal under 40B and what that subsidized housing inventory, what we call often as the capital A affordable units that meet all those requirements that I just went through? The town's halfway there. Of the 9,641 year-round housing units, 479, or 4.97%, are currently in the subsidized housing inventory. So there's a current gap of a little less than 500 units to get to the affordability goal under the 2010 census figures. When the 2020 census figures are released, there will be a change in the affordability percentage based on the current units in the subsidized housing inventory, likely to, well, not huge, but to 4.8%, for example. All privately owned subsidized housing is for the elderly, including most of the Milton Housing Authority units. All units in 40B rental developments count as affordable, as opposed to only the actual affordable units in a home ownership project that is permitted through 40B, usually 25% of the total number of units. We entered into this planning project, certainly because of housing production requirements, focusing on that under 80% of area median income level. However, we've found housing needs beyond that level, and we have documented them in the plans. So the idea is to really look at the most vulnerable residents, but at the same time to pay attention to those who do not necessarily qualify for housing assistance, but still are shut out of the housing market and have a need, unmet housing need. And so what are we missing in Milton is we're missing units in that full range. And even those who are earning above 80% and even above 100% of median income have cost burdens, they're spending too much, and are still having problems affording to live in Milton. So those units that still serve a pressing local need but don't necessarily qualify for the subsidized housing inventory, we have included those units in the plan and often refer to them as the little a affordable units. So this is just a quick little look at some of the major findings from the housing needs assessment. Most of them are not going to come as any surprise. Just on demographic shifts, the town has an increasingly aging population that's driven by the baby boomers. The projected declines in children and middle-aged residents based on population projections by the Metropolitan Area Planning Council and the State Data Center at the University of Massachusetts Donahue Institute. Just for example, those under 15 are expected to decline by 13% between 2010 and 2030. High projected increases in older residents, once again driven by the baby boomers. Those over 65 are expected to increase from 15.4% of all residents in 2010 to 25 to 26% by 2030, depending on which projection is used from MAPC. This is a significant increase. Under economic characteristics, relatively high incomes with a median household income of $126,000, which is high in comparison to the county, which is at $95,668, and the state at $74,167. There has been a decline in lower income households, many potentially driven out of the community based on rising housing costs or changing lifestyles. 15% of households had incomes of less than $35,000 in 2017. These are based on 2017 census estimates, compared to 22% in 1999. On the other end of the range, those with higher incomes are increasing significantly. There was a 43% of the households in Milton had incomes of more than $150,000 based on the 2017 census estimates, compared to 18% in 1999, more than doubling. And the median income of owners was $144,363 compared to renters at $51,161. We are, seeing increasing income disparities based on age, tenure, and the type of household. Housing, 0 vacancy rates based on the 2017 census estimates for both ownership and rental. It doesn't even take into account normal turnover, representing extremely tight market conditions. And predominance of owner-occupied housing at 82% of all units, limited housing diversity in the community. This slide, I know it's not easy to see. The bottom line is the median income, changing from 1979 to 2017. The top line is the median house price, going through the same period, from 62.6 to 800 to $640,000. The middle line, the line just above the bottom line, is the affordable price for those earning at 80% of area median income, right at those levels based on the HUD limits. And the line just above that is affordable prices based on the median income. And you kind of see the price, the affordability gap, the difference from the affordable price for median income and the median house price kind of going back and forth, and towards the top, more currently, diverging. And the median house price, I just checking, as the end of 2019 has gone up to $720,500. So that widening is continuing to occur. So also is documented in the housing needs census, there's very little affordability remaining in the private housing stock. There were 121 single-family homes and 87 condos that were assessed for less than $400,000. And assessments usually underrepresent actual market values. Prices remain high. As of May, the median single-family house price was $700,000, and I just mentioned, as of the end of the year, went up to $720,500. And that median, that $700,000 required an income of $158,250 estimated versus the $126,000 median household income. Market rents are also high, with a median of $2,875 that would require an income of about $123,000, pretty comparable to the median household income. High single-family affordability gap of $142,600, and that's the difference between what a median income earning household can afford versus the median single-family house price. And that gap widens significantly to $387,000 at the 80% of area median income limit. I mean, and this is based on a household of three. If we look at a single-person household, that gap is about almost $700,000. They're increasing cost burdens. I mentioned before, if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing costs, you're spending too much, and you're considered to have cost burdens. 30% of the 2,742 households, or 2,742 households, were spending too much. They had cost burdens. And 14%, or 1,286 households, were spending more than 50% of their income on housing costs, and that's all Milton households. If you look at those who are earning at or below 80% of area median income, those with cost burdens include 72% of these households and 44% with severe cost burdens. As expenses, housing costs continue to rise, we expect increasing affordability gaps and increasing cost burdens. So just briefly, the conversions of these trends all point to greater housing challenges for the Milton community. An aging population, and I've got to mention a comment that I think kind of captured so much of the housing affordability problems for seniors. The Council on Aging representative basically said, seniors are so tired about hearing how much their home is worth based on the current market costs when they don't know where to locate to downsize because there are such few options, and those options that are there have huge wait lists. Fewer young adults, certainly the need for starter housing, growing income disparities, limited new housing production. I think between 2010 and 2019, there were about 164 net new units, which is down considerably from previous decades. Extremely low vacancy rates, as I mentioned, at 0. Very high and rising housing prices for both ownership and rental. Large upfront cash requirements as home ownership. If you don't qualify for a subsidized mortgage, you're talking about typically more 20% down payment plus closing costs. And then for rentals, you're talking about first month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, which adds up and creates the barriers for renter households to access units. Widening affordability gaps and increasing cost burdens. So we're going to move into the housing strategies. I just wanted to go through. We have kind of put this package of strategies together based on a number of sources. Previous plans and studies, we revisited the 2014 housing production plan, which was also informed by the earlier 2006 plan. There are the master plan process happened just a couple years ago. We really looked at what was proposed there, and as well as the other studies that have been done related to housing. A couple of them done by MAPC, for example. The housing needs assessment really set the context for the range of housing needs and what populations and we need to focus on and how to actually address those needs in a meaningful way, but pragmatic way. Interviews with housing stakeholders. We had meetings of the working group were really important, but also meetings included that first housing forum in September, which was really, really so useful in directing us to where the town's housing agenda should focus during the next 5 years. Those strategies have worked in Milton, but also informed by models of housing production or zoning that have been implemented effectively in other communities. And then the housing needs assessment also established some targeted goals with a heavy favoring of rental housing over ownership housing, with still the recognition that some starter housing and units for downsizing makes sense. Given the aging of Milton's housing stock and historic character in many cases, there also was a look at housing preservation efforts. I just wanted to mention that the state's housing production regulations specify that housing production plan must address various categories of strategies, which include these: to identify zoning districts or geographic areas in which the town proposes to modify current regulations to meet housing goals, identify specific sites which the town will encourage 40B permitting, identify preferred characteristics of proposed residential or mixed-use development, identify town-owned property for which the town plans to develop through an RFP process, and identify regional collaborations addressing housing development. And we have done this through the package of strategies that is included in this plan. So first, looking at zoning strategies, where the planning board will really take the lead. First, to adopt zoning for mixed-use development. And we should mention, the town has made substantial progress in this area through creating the Central Avenue Planned Unit Development District. That has actually resulted in a couple of projects that include affordable units. One at 36 Central Avenue includes affordable units as well as 3 commercial units. And what's under construction now, I saw some progress on the way here at 131 Elliott Street with 4 affordable units. The town has also created opportunities for mixed commercial and residential zoning under the Parkway PUD. And a recent proposal, I understand, had come forward to do development in that district. There's also the Brownfield PUD that was meant to promote adaptive reuse of a paper mill to convert that property to residential use. And the town received a Mass Works grant of $1 million to connect Central Ave and the Milton Village districts. That has also resulted in a development that created affordable units through the Milton Hill House, 27 total units, 3 affordable units. The town has conducted a zoning study for Milton Village and has drafted some zoning that it hopes to present at the spring town meeting that will enable better encourage mixed-use development in that important area through the Milton Village mixed-use PUD. And it's also done some studies on East Milton Square and how to better promote more vitality and revitalize that area with some mixed uses. It had got some support from a report from MAPC, and also had a charrette, a meeting to further look into opportunities to rezone that area with Urban Land Institute. So besides doing another planned unit development, the town should explore the potential of using Chapter 40R in that area that comes with a number of financial incentives to help create greater feasibility of development in that area. I should mention that most of the PUD zoning includes a mandate that at least 10% of the units be affordable and eligible for inclusion in the subsidized housing inventory. But as values rise, there are opportunities to actually increase that percentage to potentially 15% or a sliding scale based on a number of factors. New zoning should consider that potential opportunity. And we're looking at mandates for including affordability in new development. The plan suggests that the town explore a town-wide bylaw on inclusionary zoning. And once again, looking at increasing the affordability level beyond 10% up to 15%, but once again with a potential sliding scale, maybe at 15% for properties in areas where the values are higher, such as in commercial areas and near transit, and lower in residential neighborhoods when there are smaller scale projects. Also, the plan suggests that the town look at payment in lieu of actual units. There are some, you always want the actual affordable units, but there are some instances where, the affordability is challenging. And to have the developers the opportunity to actually commit funding to the Housing Trust Fund in lieu of those units is something that should be looked at. Numbers of towns are doing that, and we've included formulas for consideration. It's important that that formula that you include in any inclusionary zoning bylaw appropriately give you an amount where it's feasible to actually create an affordable unit. And so that would be an important ingredient in any kind of bylaw. And then streamlining the permit approval process. It's suggested that the town look at whether it would be useful or even necessary for the town to create some greater predictability in its permitting process, and to align that with housing guidelines, where in the case of affordable units, a developer who proposes a project that's in line with certain town priorities and preferences with regard to location, scale, et cetera, will have an expectation that their project will likely be approved. Amend accessory temporary apartment bylaw. The plan suggests that the town consider amending the bylaw to make it friendlier and for the creation of these units that can provide a number of public benefits. At this point, the bylaw limits occupancy to a family member. And while that's an important piece, an important benefit, one of the real benefits would be to have the owner to have income reduced from that accessory apartment to help them remain in the unit and remain in the community, to really better promote affordability. That you can't really get to that same level if you're limiting occupancy just to family members. And then to amend the condo conversion bylaw, there are opportunities to in the zoning bylaw to convert properties, large properties into condos. However, the bylaw has not been very effective, primarily because it only focuses on large properties of at least 10 acres. So while the conversion of larger properties into multiple units and creating some greater affordability there potentially is a good thing, the bylaw would really have to be revised in order to really make the kind of diversion activity work. And then we included just a couple of recommendations regarding building capacity to better promote affordable housing in the community. One is to conduct better community education and outreach related to any new housing-related initiative. The idea is to have an inclusive, robust, and transparent process of explaining to the community what types of new initiatives you'd like to have approval for, at the same time making sure that the community has the opportunity to weigh in and provide some good guidance on what is being proposed and ultimately approved. We provide a whole bunch of examples of ways to build greater kind of community outreach on housing. And then to capitalize the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So the town did create an Affordable Housing Trust, which is a really great step in the right direction. But it really does need sustainable resources in order to appropriately subsidize new development, new programs and services. In particular, new development, that the difference between total development costs and what a qualifying occupant can afford is increasing, and consequently, more layers of subsidy are ever more necessary to make projects feasible. The town did go for an approval of Community Preservation Act in 2012 that didn't work. Times had changed since then, and given the high costs of housing in Milton, as well as the historic nature of so many properties, and the need to try to still deal with open space preservation, CPA could be a terrific way of improving the quality of life within the community. But there are other examples of resources other communities have tapped into. And once again, we mentioned the inclusionary zoning bylaw, where there's a potential to get payment in lieu of units that could be deposited into the trust fund and invested in other projects, worthwhile projects. And under housing production strategies, make publicly owned property available for affordable housing is kind of the first priority. A significant component of this plan is the recommendation that the town continue to pursue the development of the town farm that's under the jurisdiction of the Governor Stoughton Trust. There is currently, the town is undertaking a feasibility analysis of development options, and then hopefully we'll be able to move ahead with support from the Governor Stoughton Trust and put together requests for proposals and select a developer that's going to get the project based on the terms and conditions established through the RFP. And what was mentioned, I think importantly, in the community housing forum that we held in September was, given that it's a publicly owned property, even trust, and such an important opportunity within the town, that there should be real serious consideration to creating all the units in any kind of development as affordable, as opposed to just a percentage of units to maximize public benefit. There are some other town-owned properties that are also included in the plan, one being the Selectman's parcel off the access road, in which we understand the owner of an adjacent property might be interested in developing that property. Maybe there's an opportunity to combine both sites under one larger project. And continue to pursue mixed-use and transit-oriented development based on the new zoning opportunities that are recommended as part of the plan. Continue to pursue adaptive use, not just through the brownfields PUD, but also there have been numbers of suggestions that there are potentially some buildings in Lower Mills that might be converted to residential use, and some church-owned property that's underutilized that maybe there are ways that they can be converted for residential use in partnership with the churches. And then support scattered site infill development. And this is kind of a smaller scale units largely within existing neighborhoods that don't have adverse effect on the neighborhood, and can include such things as like a habitat build, two-family development, which is restricted in zoning, but makes a lot of sense with respect to a kind of great starter housing, particularly when there's an owner-occupied building with a rental unit. Special needs housing, and the town has a great model through its the Work Incorporated facility, where it invested a significant amount of home program funding, and is a really terrific project. There are smaller 40Bs that can be included under the scattered site recommendation, including units in like pocket neighborhoods. This is the Riverwalk that's often talked about in Concord that actually includes some affordable units. These kind of smaller pocket neighborhoods of clusters of bungalows or cottages around a green space, which are great for starter housing as well as housing for those looking to downsize. It was also mentioned that there are micro-units co-living. There might be opportunities, that there are models that are happening in the Boston area, and then in the downtown, in some of the village centers. A project like that might really serve a need and blend in to the context of the area. And then converting larger homes into multiple units, where it still resembles the larger home, but there actually provides more, additional housing opportunities for starter housing and downsizing. And then lastly, housing preservation strategies. There are numbers of communities that have introduced these small repair grant programs. We've got grants typically around $5,000 to qualifying owners to make health and safety improvements. And they've been quite popular and have served as kind of a niche need in the communities where they've been implemented. And we give a couple of models on what has been done in other communities. And then help residents access housing assistance through programs and services that are already in place by key nonprofits or other institutions. I mean, certainly the Council on Aging Senior Center provides a wide array of great programs and services. Milton Residence Fund and related funds that provide emergency assistance and special assistance to qualifying household, and really serve an important need within the Milton community. And the programs that are served by the Quincy Community Action Program also, we try to kind of provide a list of these particular services, and the more information you can get out to community residents about them so that they can access them, the better. And then maintain affordability of the subsidized housing inventory. These are these units that count towards the 10% or housing production goals. There are a couple of developments where the affordability requirements are due to expire. However, they are owned and sponsored by mission-based organizations that are there to, provide affordable housing opportunities. So one would expect that the affordable housing requirements would be extended, but the town should monitor progress and be in touch with these entities and be helpful to advocate for additional resources where useful. And next steps, we need approval of both the planning board and the select board in order to submit the plan to the state. We're going to do a final read-through and make sure that we capture any kind of typos or irregularities, and then the town will, sign a cover letter and submit the plan to DHCD. DHCD usually, well, they can take up to 90 days to review the plan, but they have been turning them around much shorter time periods. So, a month to 6 weeks is not unreasonable. So the idea is to try to get the approvals and to get the plan in, and if we need to make any changes, we do so sooner rather than later. And that's kind of a quick, in the nutshell, summary of what's in the current plan, and we can now kind of have a discussion with any questions or comments.
I know.
Ready to make a motion.
Ready to second.
Really? Did you hear that, Mr. Chair?
What is that?
I said, I'm ready to make a motion. Ms. Collins ready to second it.
All right, well, thank you, Karen. That was great. Thank you to all who have participated in the working group that's participated in preparing this report. At this point, we can open it up for public comment and comments and questions from the boards. So why don't we see first if we have any public comment on the matter, whether it's, if there's anyone here who has any public comment? Seeing none? Going once, going twice? Well, we can always come back to it. Something may occur to someone, so we can always go back to it. All right, so what I normally do, and I defer to you, Cheryl, but what I normally do is just open up the comments and questions to the board. I don't know if we want to do that jointly, or have my board do comments and questions, and then your board do comments? How do you?
I think we could do it jointly.
Okay.
But first, I would like to, from our board's perspective, thank Rich Beeler for serving on the Housing Committee and for his work on behalf of the Planning Board on this. And also thank Katie Conlon from wearing my Master Plan Implementation Committee hat for her work. And then, of course, thank Melinda Collins for her leadership on addressing the really critical housing needs that the town faces.
Thank you, thank you. I'll echo all of that. So now I guess we can open up to comments and questions from the members. So,
I'm ready to go.
Mr. Wells is ready to vote.
Ready to go.
Any comments or questions, or from the Affordable Housing Trust? If you all would like to take a seat here, if you have comments or questions, although you've participated in preparing this, so you probably don't have any questions about
Tom
it.
was ready 6 weeks ago.
So Mike, I
Does
have...
Kathleen have, are you leaning forward, Kathleen?
Yeah, actually, there was one thing I wanted to think about was on the strategies and the summary of housing strategies and the timing on them. We've been talking on the planning board about amending the accessory apartment bylaw for a number of reasons. One of them is the fact that we say that it has to be an existing dwelling, so people have to keep going to the zoning board to get a variance, so they can like finish off the garage and put the apartment in, rather than finishing off the garage and then coming back, ripping it all out and putting the apartment in. So that's one of the things that we just sort of wanted to fix. And of course, the idea that it has to be an owner and a family member. If you are doing estate planning trusts and that sort of thing, that also triggers a problem with our bylaw. So we did have those kinds of things that we're already looking at. And so with the suggestion of the housing plan, I'd like to take a look, but I'd like to move that to sort of in our first 2 years, not year 3 and 5.
I'd just like to also mention that the amending the condo conversion bylaw is probably something we could put in the priority 1. The planning board has been talking about doing that. It's on our list of zoning articles to address. So I'd like to make that suggestion. I will also make a comment. I think having reviewed the plan and provided some input along the way, so that the plan does reflect some of the work that the planning board's been working on, as Karen mentioned, in terms of East Milton Square and Milton Village, which are business districts that do not allow multifamily housing in the district currently. So it is something that was referenced in the master plan. It was something, I think, referenced in the prior housing production plan. And certainly, in the case of Milton Village and Central Ave, provides opportunity for housing to meet a different need that's for folks who could take advantage of public transportation or alternate forms of transportation like the bike path. And so that we are working already in sync with some of the strategies in the housing production plan.
Other comments and questions from the select board or the planning board? No? I actually have two comments. One, the thing that was most striking to me, and this is not really related to the plan, it's related to the statistics, and those are the poverty figures. And while our poverty figures are still below state and county levels, they have increased. And what is particularly striking and really will demand some action, I think, on our part, is we've seen a significant increase in poverty in the senior population, age 65 and older. It's gone, as set forth in the report, it's doubled, more than doubled since 1999, and that increase has really exacerbated from 2011 to 2017. And so that's something that we all need to, not only in affordable housing, but as Karen mentioned, with respect to, supporting and redoubling our efforts with the food pantry and the Milton Residence Fund and all of those things, because these statistics tell us what we already know, but it really puts it in bold relief that we really need to address what's going on in this town with respect to seniors. So that's number one. That's really a comment more than anything else. And number two, one of the things that was referenced in the report, and Karen, maybe you can help a little bit, and that is the numbers with respect to children. In the report, it does show an increase in the numbers with respect to children. The school committee has shown us that enrollment in schools has significantly increased and has led to what has been described as an enrollment crisis. And the DESI figures show increasing numbers of students. The projections are throughout the next 5 to 10 years, increasing number of students, which seems to be a little bit at odds with maybe the MAPC numbers. And so this report, I think, I've actually forwarded this draft to the school building committee to see how they reconcile some of those numbers, because you do note an increase, but I'm not sure if the increase, I just want to make sure that we have a full picture on the school side and on the MAPC side in terms of children, because that's going to be very critical certainly for our school side of things.
So,
yeah, please.
We did talk to the school superintendent and to other, I think another
Glenn
staff
Pavlicek,
person.
Right.
He's in business.
And-
Assistant Superintendent for Business, Glenn
Right.
Pavlicek.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And there was just a general sense that children have been increasing, but over time, projections are that there will be some fall off of student population. So that's, I think we got it from the not just MAPC projections, but also, I think there was a, trying to find it, the New England school,
Department of Elementary and Secondary Education.
There would
yeah.
be some, it's in here somewhere
Yep, okay.
on that.
And if I remember, I think that was at the higher ages where that fall off is occurring versus.
That makes sense.
The way I read it was that the increases and looking at the DESI and all of that for the, because I went to something last year from the Mass Municipal Association, that it's in the lower grades that we're getting this increase. So of course, we're only looking at a certain time period.
Yep.
It does say continued enrollments, yeah.
Right.
And that's
Right.
entirely consistent. If you're
Yeah.
talking, if this is talking about elementary age increases, that's entirely consistent with what the school committee's been telling us. So that's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
So Karen, a question. Where you mentioned a rise in the number of over 65 population, we also have, I think was it 25% where there's a single-person household or one-person household? And nearly 75% of our housing stock is single-family residential. It seems to me that one of our strategies really is looking at those. What do those statistics tell us? There's a long waiting list at the multifamily, age-restricted facilities.
Right.
And so is one of the strategies to increase or try to find ways to increase multifamily age-restricted housing in order to address those demographic?
Well, I got to say, I mean,
Factors, I guess
Milton, so much of the subsidized housing is for seniors.
Understood.
There's still not enough, but still needs to be a focus on families somewhere. So there has to be a balance. Yeah, it looks, there are numbers of seniors that are clearly overhoused, have lots of excess capacity. That's why the accessory apartment makes so much sense, or
Right.
conversion of units into multiple units makes some sense, where there's greater flexibility and ability to kind of get some income through those properties. But there's still a need for smaller units, for smaller households.
But do you see that being single-family, or do you see that being multifamily?
I see it being multifamily or these small little clusters of bungalows or cottages, but smaller units.
Smaller units?
Danny?
I did have a question. When I was a kid, well, probably a little bit before that, but the GI Bill
Oh,
was
yeah.
a wonderful way
Yeah.
to get starter
Yeah.
homes, little capes, little ranches,
Right. Right.
2-bedroom, 3-bedroom.
The real starter housing.
Yeah, the real starter housing that also worked when people wanted to downsize. I don't see very much of that in Milton. Are there any federal programs like that anymore? Are there any, I mean, that just seems like something the state could really use.
The GI Bill still exists. The GI funding, veterans funding still exists on first-time loans. It's just finding the stock and the price range to do it in this town.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. There is very limited funding for public housing. A lot of the units were developed as public housing after World War II, but also by the private developers. They knew where the market was, and so they were developing smaller units. The cost of land is so high that unless you have some zoning flexibility where you can cluster more units and create some economies of scale, it's hard to get those projects financed, and you need subsidies in order to bring the prices from the market level down to the affordable ones. And there are state resources available that can help with the subsidies. They do like to have the towns make a contribution either through property or through their own resources. That's why CPA has been such a valuable tool to leverage other sources of public financing to make projects feasible. There is a program called the Community Scale Housing Initiative, which was meant to provide subsidies for smaller projects than the larger projects that are typically funded through what's called low-income housing tax credits and other kind of layers of housing. That has worked pretty well in communities. I got to say, though, all the communities had CPA money in order to make it work. So that's, Tom mentioned that there is a new pot of money for home ownership to help with support to provide subsidies for home ownership and down payment assistance. But that alone, in a high-cost market like Milton, is probably not sufficient without other types of financing.
Karen, you mentioned in the report focus on rental housing. Can you just talk about that a little bit more?
Yes, if you are, there are numbers of benefits for rental housing. One, if you're going to leverage any money, almost all the state resources are for rental housing. If you use 40B, you can count all the units towards the SHI or housing production goals instead of just the affordable ones in home ownership. Rental housing typically has more turnover, so there are more occupants over time to benefit from rental housing. They typically, with financing, you can get at some of the more vulnerable, lower income tiers. It's like below 60% AMI, 50%, and even in some cases down to 30%. And we find from the documentation of that there are folks in those lower income levels that are really struggling. They're paying more than half their income on housing costs, and they're really struggling in the community. There are compelling reasons to really look towards kind of smaller rental units as a way of meeting some of this housing need. And we were talking about the majority, the plan suggests actually about 85% of all the new units that are affordable be rentals.
Mr. Wells.
So when you say smaller units, you mean smaller developments versus smaller, because as you know, in any of them we're required to have so many one-bedrooms, so many two-bedrooms, so many three-bedrooms. So you mean small in size versus, 100 units, 200, massive, some of these bigger developments.
I think talking about smaller size units. So for rentals, we have like a breakdown of numbers of like.
So making them small in size, I get it, versus big, I get it.
50, they'd be smaller units. For home ownership, though, we're talking about more family housing. So more 3 bedrooms. At least 10, the state agencies have signed an interagency agreement, though, that unless the project's age restricted or it's a sober house or something like that, at least 10% of the units have to be 3 bedrooms, whether it be ownership or rental. In the case of ownership, you really want to have many more, a greater percentage of the units be for 3 bedrooms plus. And I think the plan talks about a mix of larger projects as far as number of units and smaller projects that fit into the neighborhood. So that there's a mix of opportunities out there.
You see that a lot in Dorchester and South Boston. You see that?
Exactly.
Ms. Swenson.
I do have, I'd be interested to hear more of your thoughts on Habitat for Humanity.
They're always looking for property
They are.
donated, but it pretty much has to be donated property. So they're always looking, and it's a great opportunity to deal with some of these infill lots But it's a challenge for them to actually get their hands on
Yeah,
property, so
we've
they can
worked-
do the builds.
We've worked with them, but basically it's been tax title parcels. So they're
Right.
town-owned tax title parcels, and then we've turned them over to Habitat for Humanities for free. But Milton doesn't really have that many, or maybe none, tax title parcels. But that's the classic example for a town to use, and with a partnership with Habitat, is to do the tax title parcels. But
There have been, Hingham, for example, their
Yeah.
housing trust is actually buying property.
I
The
full
lower, you know,
disclosure, I
so-
represent the Housing Trust in Hingham.
Yeah, I mean,
We just
they
did
are
one.
actually, you know, purchasing, acquiring properties. So
Yeah.
their tax title is, you know, a great kind of access, but in higher priced communities, because property's so valuable, people don't
Yeah, you don't.
don't go into tax foreclosure
lose
if they
them,
can
yeah.
help it.
But the fact of the matter is Hingham has CPA, so we've been. the
That's right.
Housing Trust is funded with
It's been
CPA,
huge
and money
for-
we've
yeah.
used.
Well, that actually leads to a question that I was going to ask you that may be difficult to answer, difficult to quantify, but I'm going to ask you anyway, and maybe you can give us your opinion. How much is Milton losing with respect to affordable housing by not participating in the Community Preservation Act?
The actual amount?
No, just a general, I mean, I'm giving you the opportunity to give us an opinion on how much we're losing by not participating in the Community Preservation Act.
Well, I do see that those communities that have CPA are, you know, are making significantly more progress with respect to moving forward in a housing agenda. And they use CPA to actually pay for staff to coordinate it. You know, once again, to participate in a lot of state programs, you have to have some local investment. So if it's not the actual property, it's a resource. And, you know, once again, because of the historic nature of so many properties in Milton, it just seems to me that it's to deal with the historic preservation and the housing and some open space preservation, potentially through some little clusters. I mean, you could hit all the bases pretty easily. At this point, when you don't have CPA, you're relying primarily on zoning to mandate affordability. And at 10% of the total project, you're making not a lot of, you're making incremental, you go in the right direction. But you're not creating a big impact that you could, when you can build up to scale and get more resources.
Mr. Clark? Nope. Mr. Wells, do you want to go?
I'll go after you.
I think part of that answer is, last year, we would have received $93,000 from the state. You had the potential to put 70% of that towards affordable housing. One of the things that communities that have CPA do is, it's their long-term financing. It's a dedicated fund that you know is going to be there. I don't have to take and rely on a town's budget. It's already coming, and it's going to be there year after year. And it's just how you set up your budgets for the CPA. Instead of having to rely on town meeting, that number is already coming in. You may not get, we got 93,000 this year. Next year, maybe we don't have as many people buying houses or refinancing houses, so we're down to 75. It's still, there's a percentage of that money that's being dedicated towards affordable housing.
Right now, that money's going to other communities. Ms. Swenson?
Yes.
Oh, yes. I wanted to hear a little bit more about the scattered affordable housing that you mentioned. Do you see that as small as 2 or 3 units, or is it 5 or something?
You know, I see a range depending on the size of the property. I mean, there, Habitat build 1 or 2 units on a single parcel is, you know, terrific. I mean, it's going to provide much-needed housing for somebody who really wants to stay and live in the community, is having problems doing it. Some of these pocket neighborhoods that we see that we see being built in communities, you know, they vary considerably, and from like 6 to, 20 to even a little bit larger, and there's a big range on those types of development. If you could do more two-family units, in other words, you're making some progress, but these are, in neighborhood projects tend to be smaller in size. They call these things the missing middle in a kind of urban, design, where these projects, they look not so different from single-family houses, but they fit into the community and they can provide some multifamily housing without looking so much like multifamily housing.
Mr. Wells?
When,
I was just gonna ask
go
a
ahead,
follow-up to that,
go
if you don't
ahead.
mind.
Go ahead. I have about 5.
Okay,
So go ahead.
just to follow up to what Denny asked, that smaller grouping, the Concord Riverwalk, my recollection is, and because I think of some of the sites that we have in Milton, which lack frontage or have a very small amount of frontage, and the solution for that is a subdivision, which ends up eating up land for roadways, et cetera. Do you know if that Concord Riverwalk whether they had any zoning revision to make that
It
happen?
was under a PUD.
Under a PUD? Okay, thanks.
But there are other towns have done 40Bs.
Okay. Thank
Or
you.
40R, we, did small Belmont, we did the 6
That's right,
unit,
that's right,
40R,
that's right,
and a conversion of a church,
that's right.
so,
Yep.
yeah.
Mr. Wells?
Thanks, thank you, Chief.
you.
So a couple things. You're correct on, like, in housing, like, just in the senior facilities here. Winter Valley across the street, 308. Home Inc. 10 to 12-year wait, 10-plus years.
Yes.
I have no idea how long Fuller is, but Fuller's not cheap.
Right.
So that's, I know that, and Cheryl remember this, that in Falcone's initial proposal in East Milton 3 years ago, when he first came forward with his mixed-use proposal, the ones who were for it were many who were single-family homes now, empty nesters who wanted to downsize, but wanted to still stay in East Milton.
Right.
And so I see that. The other thing that, and I had this discussion with Wayne today, historically in this town, so in East Milton, right near Rich's house there's a street, Duggan Lane. Duggan Lane, when we moved here and I was a kid, was the Belcher School. They tore it down, they built 6 single-family homes. Eligibility was you had to be a new town employee, and 6 town employees got to live there.
Yeah.
Same on Lyman Road, became all, and it's great, like, I bought a house here in 1998 for X amount, and I sold it 2 years ago for a way bigger amount. And that's a great thing, but for the young family who's coming in here today, and especially for our young employees, our police officers, our firefighters, our teachers, you need, just as we, the elected officials, live in town and buy in by serving the town, you want to have your employees live here. There's a benefit to that. It's easy if you're out in a police car and a fight, and then you drive 50 miles away, I work there, but how much does my buy into the community? My kids don't go to school there. So
Right,
those are
right,
things
right,
that
right.
you need to, and to your point out the small things, Tom, you'll remember when, my first year in office, and I sat on the affordable before Melinda did, you brought in, I think it was Mass Housing, and they gave us what they had done in Needham, and it was all small, just in residential neighborhoods, like, they made a 2-unit here and a 2, like they chipped away in small increments versus, hey, let's try and get 50 and get 2% of our, up our percentage by 2%. So
I gotta say, though, the way that Needham they are now 12.7%.
Right.
They've done large 40B rental developments in industrial areas.
yeah, we don't have
In
those
the business
industrial
parks.
areas.
And that's where they've gotten their numbers. And there was not such comparability of location in Milton, but looking at least at some commercial corridors or places near transportation, that's where you can build to some scale.
So my last comment is a suggestion to the chair that perhaps, I was chief during the last CPA campaign, police chief. Maybe jointly we schedule a meeting and have a forum discussion. Because many of the people who were either pro or against at that time have probably even forgotten about it. Even I don't remember all the things about it. I do understand the benefits to it. The difference between us and Hingham is that I don't know how many operational overrides Hingham has had to have, but historically here, since the inception of 2.5 in 1980, we've had to have an override, an operational override that's grown
Yeah,
massively.
yeah.
About every 5. We went 8 years on the last, about 8, which was a big, 9 years on the last one, which was really, but prior to that, it'd been 5 to 6, so, and that's one of the
Yeah,
things,
it's
the
hard.
differences between
It's a
us and them. But
political
maybe we
reality.
should have the discussion and talk about it. I mean, I've forgotten, it's so long since I've even heard it mentioned, but as Katie will remember, Tom Hurley was a big champion of, he wanted to use it for the fire station project, he was a big champion of CPA, so maybe we should think about doing that in the not-too-distant future.
And I got to mention that the Community Preservation Coalition provides great technical support and is available to come out and have a meeting. Maybe that's a, way to kind of just have them start an informal discussion, and they're really great.
Ms. Conlon?
Thank you.
We've had them out here before.
You have two members of
Go
the
ahead.
chair,
I'll second.
Kathleen and I both serve on the steering committee.
of the Community Preservation Coalition.
Why am I not surprised by that one?
Kathleen was just given an award.
You can actually do the meeting. I didn't realize that you were both on
He's the
that.
chair,
Didn't Kathleen, did you just get an award?
did.
Congratulations. Didn't you just get an award for
yes, for resigning.
Oh, wonderful.
For her years of service.
I think Katie has
So, Mr.
something.
Chair, unfortunately, I have another commitment tonight, so I'm going to have to leave, but I am in favor of approving the plan overall. I think it's a good plan. It's the product of a lot of work. It builds on our 2014 plan, in which Karen also put in a lot of work. Obviously, it's a roadmap. There's a lot of partners we're going to have in order to make these goals work over the next 5 years if we're going to achieve any of the development that's contemplated by the plan. And there's a lot of outside parties involved and a lot of variables, but I think it's a good roadmap, and it's a step in the right direction. It's where we should be moving. There's a lot of different strategies that we need to continue to build on, and a lot of work is going to have to go into all of those. We'll probably be able to achieve some. We may not be able to achieve all of them, but we can work towards all of them. So I'm in favor of it. I don't know if the two boards have a lot of other comments or questions, but.
Katie, I think our board might be ready to vote.
Yeah.
So, well, then
I think
if that's the
board-
case, I'll move that we approve, that the select board approves the housing production plan as drafted.
Second.
Motion's-
Before you vote, may I just ask one thing quickly? On the chart, on the table I-1, under C, Housing Production Strategies, number 3, there's no column for the time frame for that one. I just thought maybe we could plug that in before the vote, if that's okay with folks.
It's priority 2, 3 to 5.
Continue to promote
Sorry,
adaptive
down.
reuse.
And we're going to make those changes
It-
based on timing.
Right.
that you-
I think it's actually in the plan. I had to recreate this
Oh,
so
I
that I
see,
could blow
okay.
it up for you all this
All right,
evening.
okay, fine.
But that was my error, I'm sure, because I know that was populated. But
Okay,
I'll-
no problem.
I'll double check it in the plan. As Karen said, we have cleanup to do. We put the most
Yeah.
recent version
Yeah.
up on the town website with the red, the changes in red, just so people could see how the plan's developed since the last time it was put up.
Do we need a friendly amendment, like
Thank you.
subject to final edits? Do we need something like that? I think we're okay, just,
Yeah, we can say subject to
Subject
final.
to
edits.
final edits.
I'll accept that, yes.
okay, so subject to final edits?
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I'll ask the planning board for a motion.
I move that we adopt the, vote to approve the housing production plan with corrective amendments.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you
Motion
very
adjourned.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think before we go, we just want to address next steps. Or
So, you're going to send me the draft that you've been working on. I'm going to do a final read-through and make the changes that were suggested tonight, and make sure that there aren't any typos and that full sentences, et cetera, and get that back to you within the next several days. And then you have, Bill's been working on the cover letter.
I'll prepare the cover letter that goes to DHCD.
And I sent instructions
Yes.
with you, and how the
Right.
municipality has to submit the plan to the state directly.
Right.
So I have all the information, and we'll just get it to the state as soon as we can.
Right? get the minutes
The
together.
state likes to see the minutes
Right.
of the approvals, but you don't have to hold up the submission for that. Just state in the cover letter that you'll be saying them as soon as they're prepared.
We should be able to get them together quickly, so.
Great. Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
delightful working with
You
you
want a
all.
motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
We feel the same way.
I'll make a motion
Yeah.
to
All those
adjourn.
in favor?
Yeah.
Aye.
Motion
We're
to
adjourned.
adjourn on our side?
Second.
Second.
Motion been made, second, all those in favor?